Okay, so keep in mind with your grades for your portfolio, or for all your grades, is that I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, and if you see something that doesn't look like it's right, it's possible that it isn't right, and you just need to let me know about it. You need to make sure you do this right away though, because if you wait until the end of the term, it's really challenging. um, Sorry, I just saw a message here that Emma's connecting to audio. I can't hear me yet. Anyway, hopefully she gets that resolved. Um, so as I was saying, it's really challenging for me to make corrections to things that happened a couple of weeks earlier, and it's also puts you at a disadvantage because sometimes the things that you don't understand about, why you got a certain grade aren't because I made a mistake. Sometimes it's actually accurate. Hopefully most of the time it is. And you need to understand why I made the comments that I made, or why you got the grade that you got, so that you can use that information for your future work. So now's the time to get onto that, and just to clarify any fuzzy areas or things that don't look right. So generally speaking, if your your grade is really strong, and by really strong, I consider that to be B plus and higher. You had fewer comments. When you get into the A plus range, there's really very little that I can say, especially in the A plus range. That's work that, there's really nothing that I can say to help you improve that. One of the questions that I sometimes get with grades is, why is it a 9 out of 10 and not a 10 out of 10? So a 10 out of 10 is absolute genius. I'm looking at the UVic grading guide and how the grades are defined. And so generally speaking, if you're getting a 9 out of 10, that's exceptional. There are times when students will earn a 9.5 or a 10 out of 10, but the number of times that happens is really rare. Not saying it can't happen, but it's pretty unusual. So if you are getting, 8.5, 9 out of 10 for things, I hope that you're ecstatic about that, because it's really exceptional work. On the flip side of that, if your grades aren't so strong, you should have enough comments provided by me to help you understand why, where you went wrong, what you can do for next time to improve your grade. Keep in mind that while this portfolio is worth 20% of your grade, which is, a substantial portion, it is, a lesser value than the next portfolio, which is 40% of the grade. One of the things that I didn't provide for you with the feedback for this portfolio is really a very little feedback about your visual journal entries. And I want to get back to you about that. So my focus for the portfolio comments were a little bit on the writing. So most of you got a comment about your level of participation in the critique forums, because of course your critiques are part of your writing mark in your portfolios. Seeing lots of strong examples of critiques now, and if that's not the case, then you have a comment that lets you know that. And if your critiques are of value, like your critique, you're offering not just comments about what's working in drawings, but also what isn't working, then there's a comment about that as well. So as I said, I will be getting to you individually about your visual journal entries, just giving you a little bit of indication as to where you stand right now. If you were to hand in your visual journal, what kind of grade you would be looking at. I think that's, there's a couple of comments that I found myself saying repeatedly. And So I just want to run through those quickly. There was one, I can't remember who. I'm gonna look later and let you know, because you can access all the portfolios, of course, by going to the forum where you shared the URL for your ePortfolio. But there was one person who did an absolutely outstanding job in one of her drawings of showing the process for the drawing. So you can see how the whole drawing is built up all at once in stages, starting with the blocking in and then going to the basic shapes and then adding more details and then starting to add value, etc. So that is one area where there's many of you who aren't doing that, and some of you included a little note saying that you didn't know you were supposed to do that. That's unfortunate. I don't know what else I could have done. I provided a list of things that you were doing each week, and put in brackets, take a photo at this stage, you'll need it for your ePortfolio. So unfortunately there were a number of you that missed that, but now, so you're doing that for your focus drawings, and you'll be very, very able to show your process. The other comment that I found myself making quite a few times was that some people are still calling their drawings paintings. And so to those people, I made the comment that this is a drawing course. At this stage, you should not be referring to drawings as paintings, or to the process of drawing as painting. So again, if that was a concern, I've made a note of that. All of you should be using the language of art, so you should be talking about contrast, value contrast, texture contrast. You should be talking about composition, the rule of thirds, the emphasis, focal point, different types of perspective with overlapping and that sort of thing. So if you need a bit of a help with that, go back, review some of the things that we've talked about that you've practiced earlier on in the course. So I'm going to stop talking at this point and turn it over to you. If you have any questions, it would be good to hear those. There's one question, so we can't add color in our focus drawing 1. You can add color to your focus drawings, and if you have been into Course Spaces this week, you will see that there's 2 resources there for color, and I'm going to go through those with you quickly in just a bit. So more about color in a minute. Any other questions, specifically questions about your first portfolio? Okay, I don't see anybody typing and no hands up. So I'll assume that you're all good to go. I'm going to screen share. I'm going to start. First of all, before I decide what to show you, because I've actually got all 3 of the slide presentations that I put into Course Spaces ready to go here, but you might not want to see all 3, so I don't want to take up time unnecessarily. So just show of hands, how many people are going to, or rather than saying show of hands, how about if you are going to use color in your focus drawings, click on the yes button. Okay, so it looks like just one person is. So what I'll do is I'm going to show you the drawing issues slides, and then I'll take some questions, and then if that's all you want to know about, you're free to go. If you just want to hang around just in case, you're welcome to stay. So like Chris, I see that you say you haven't decided. So for sure you can stick around. You don't have to make a decision at this point. So just before I show you these slides, I did have one question over the weekend, I believe, asking, are all my focus drawings looking at or addressing the question that I wrote last week, or do I write a new question for each drawing? So the answer to that question is you have written your question. You have one question that you are addressing in a series of 4 drawings. So no, you're not writing a new question for each drawing. So just to make sure you're all clear on that. It's really important, like you did with your 4th drawing for your first portfolio, your figure drawing, you had that question, if body parts were a metaphor for self, which parts would I be? That was your focus question for that drawing. So if you were creating a series of drawings that were focused on that one question, you would create a series of 4 drawings that are all saying, you know, this part of my body is a metaphor for myself. So, you know, my left shoulder and, you know, down to my fingertips, that's metaphor for myself, and you understand why that is. And so you're presenting that part of your body from all different points of view and using different drawing styles. So let's take a look at the drawing issues and see what some of those different drawing styles could be. I'm just going to screen share here. Okay, so what you're looking at here are some of the things that we have practiced in the first 4 drawings, but there's some new things here as well. You do not have to start, you know, learning basically on your own a bunch of new things. You are welcome to continue to just practice the things that you've learned so far. So those should give you a good foundation. Those are the basics that you need. And as long as you continue to develop those skills get stronger, you're fine. You don't have to, you know, really step outside of your comfort zone and take huge risks in order to do extremely well with your second portfolio. But if you want to branch out further, you know, I don't want to hold you back. So you're really going to have to gauge that for yourselves. Where you can practice these different drawing issues, the ones that are new to you, is in your visual journal. Because your visual journal, you're not being graded on your drawing skills there. You're being graded on your risk taking. So take a look, if you haven't, hopefully you all have, but take a look at the rubric for your visual journal and see how you know, really important it is to do that experimentation, to take risks and to try these different things. So we have dealt with light and shade in the first half of the course, so you're all going to continue to practice that. We've also dealt with line, both gesture line and contour line. And so you don't necessarily have to practice both styles, but it's really good if you can. And you know, if you're still kind of uncomfortable, you're not really getting the whole, you know, the value, or I shouldn't use the word value, you're not getting the how powerful line is in drawing, that is drawing, then I really recommend that you go back to one of the very first drawings I asked you to do, which was that blind continuous contour line drawing. And I asked you to do that by drawing a hand. It doesn't have to be a hand. You can do a blind continuous contour line drawing with anything that you're observing. And the point being there is that you are spending most of your time observing. You're looking at the object that you're drawing or the subject matter that you're drawing way more than you're looking at the paper. You're only looking at the paper often enough to be able to get things in proportion, or, you know, so that things aren't hugely distorted. And of course, when you're doing a blind continuous contour line drawing, you aren't looking at the paper at all. And this is something that's really good to practice and fun to practice in your visual journal. You end up with these really weird, distorted, twisted things that sometimes barely resemble the object that you're looking at. But what happens is when you go to start, you know, even your thumbnails, but for sure when you go to start your drawing, you'll find that you just know so much more about your subject simply because you have spent this time doing this blind contour line drawing. So I really encourage you to keep that as a real focus for these 4 focus drawings. The other thing that you want to remember is that each one of your drawings, every arrangement that you do on your paper is not by accident. It is planned. And, you know, so you are literally composing these drawings. So you want to use the rule of thirds. You want to practice, you know, different compositions by creating a series of thumbnail sketches. And this should be, thumbnail sketches need to be of the same subject matter, and you're looking at it from different points of view. You're looking, you know, at where, you know, studying where's the emphasis, where's the focal point, what happens if, you know, I place this in the center as opposed to on one of those points as shown in that little diagram with the rule of thirds. And you're making careful, wise decisions when it comes to your composition. Where we start to get into some new things is with these next few slides. So some of the things that you can do before you even start your drawing is you can change the surface of that really pristine white paper. And one of the things you can do if you got some of the bonus materials when you ordered your kit, or you know, you've been in other visual arts courses, and maybe you have some watercolors, those could be watercolor paints or pencils or crayons. You can create color washes and begin your drawing, or before you begin your drawing, prepare your surface by doing a color wash like you see here. So you see 2 colors used here, and their colors are really watered down. And you need to be careful with the paper that you have, that you don't let your paper get too wet, because it's going to really buckle. But if you have some heavier weight paper, or you want to go out and buy some heavier weight paper, some watercolor paper, then you could do an application like this. If you want to use the paper that you currently have, which is, you know, not going to take a lot of moisture, then you might consider doing something like you see in the example on the right, where the surface of the paper has been prepared with a rubbing. And I've talked about this before, and this is simply where you would find a texture, an actual texture, like, you know, a grate on a heater, or, you know, the bumpy surface of you know, a brick sidewalk or something like that. And you place your paper down, and then you could take something like, you know, it could be color like a soft pastel, or either oil or a dry or chalk pastel, or a piece of charcoal or Conte, or even the side of your pencil, and you just do a rubbing, so you get the impression of that texture coming through onto your paper. So again, these are things that you can try on little scraps of paper, and then cut out sections and put them into your visual journal. And then if you want to, you can include them in your drawings. So use a whole piece of drawing paper to prepare a surface. We talked about different ways of creating depth in your drawings. So don't lose sight of that. You don't have to use linear perspective, but you may. Probably in most cases, your drawings are going to use some forms of atmospheric perspective. So overlapping, or you know, details diminishing as they go back in space, that sort of thing. And of course, your shapes are all going to include a range of values, and you're going to be aware of how light is hitting different objects in your drawings, so that you can create the illusion of depth, even if it's, you know, just say you're drawing figures or whatever. Those should still look like they're three-dimensional, and you're going to do that by using that range of values. We talked a little bit about positive negative relationships, and one of the things that you can do in your focus drawings is you can create a series of drawings that are all positive, negative, or figure ground drawings, and that can be really interesting. So there's less of a focus on you know, those shifts in value, or it can be really interesting if you do a drawing like you see in the example here, and just part of it uses that range of values to create the illusion of three-dimensionality. So it starts to play with your eye, so that the background foreground becomes quite blurred, and you create emphasis by adding that detail to a specific area. We also, in your first drawing, we looked at this idea of enlarging things, and when you enlarge things and really zoom in on a particular part of an object, it starts to become abstract. So that's another approach that you can take and you can continue to explore. One of the things that's mentioned in your options for drawing issues is this drawing into a layered surface. So this is similar to what you saw with the rubbing and the watercolor wash, only in these examples, the surface is layered, and all of them, there's paper that's been added. You don't necessarily have to do that. You can use drawing, you know, more traditional drawing materials to layer a surface. But I think these are good examples to really describe what is meant by layering. So with starting over on the left, you see in the background that there's a map. So instead of this person drawing onto a piece of drawing paper, they're using, you know, some found paper, which happens to be a map, and those can make really interesting drawings. When you start using an instruction manual, or like in the middle example, pulling bits of text and starting to build texture and different values with collage, and then drawing into those. In that middle example, you also see some, not sure if that's found text or if it's a stencil. It looks more like a stencil to me. So, you know, an example of how you might include lettering in a finished drawing, which of course is an option. And then in the example on the right, you again see paper, but this I believe is tissue paper, and it's a good way of including some color. It could be that the color is painted over a crumpled paper. Don't think that all of your paper, if you're going to get into experimenting with layered surfaces, don't restrict yourself to keeping just really flat paper. You can crumple the paper a bit and then glue that onto a surface. In all of these cases, make sure that you let the layers dry before you proceed to the next one, and certainly before you start drawing into a layered surface, you want to make sure everything is really dry before you start adding drawing materials like your pencil or charcoal pencil, that sort of thing. Another thing that's new that's on that list is superimposed objects, and this is just think of it as just drawing the same thing over top. In these cases, you see shifts in the point of view, especially in the example on the right, where you see the same face drawn a number of times, but it's from looking up at the face, so looking straight at it, looking a little bit on profile, and then combining all of those together. So these are things that can make for very, very interesting drawings. There's also transformations or metamorphoses, and this is where you start with one object or one subject, and you slowly, through a series of drawings, you transition to another object. So I don't want to give the impression that you could do 4 drawings like if you're looking at the example on the left, you might get the impression, well, my first drawing can be, a hand showing like this peace symbol, and then slowly I can transition to the rabbit, and then the 4th drawing, I have a rabbit. If you're going to do the transformations, then do it something more like you see of the example on the right, where you see one drawing and it shows this transformation. It goes full cycle, hand, bird, back to hand, and then that would be one drawing, and the second drawing would continue the same exploration, and probably with the same subject matter, but just presented in a different way. We didn't talk very much about movement, or I don't think we talked enough about movement in the first half of the course. And this is something that you really want to keep in mind. So when we're talking about movement, one of the easiest ways, one of the best ways of directing a viewer to the place that you want them to start at, so your focal point, your emphasis, is by using diagonals. And you see that in both of these drawings. In the drawing on the left, the figure with the strong diagonal holding the oar really gives that body communicates the strength of that body. And you see, diagonals everywhere, just the placement of, of the body, not just the oar is at a diagonal, but there's an opposing diagonal with the placement of the figure, the bent leg, all of those things. And then the example on the right, you see those really strong diagonals that are naturally happening when you choose to draw using 2-point perspective. So those are things that I really want you to make conscious choices about, and recognize that, they're not just diagonals, they're creating movement, and they're directing the viewer, instructing the viewer, guiding the viewer as to how to look at your drawing. Another thing that is really, really helpful, really going to strengthen your series of drawings, is if you are looking at your subject matter from different points of view or from different perspectives. So I've shown 3 different points of view here. The first one's looking down, bird's eye, and when you look at the pop can, you see what that means. You're looking at the top of it. To get all of these effects, you want to use 1-point perspective. So bug's view is, you're at the bottom looking up, and you can see here how 1-point perspective is used with the really wide feet and the really, narrowing of the shoulders, and the head is tiny in comparison. And the foreshortening is, like you see here, it's often used in things like superhero comics, and you see that figure flying towards you, and you can follow, the figure back. So you see an example of foreshortening here with this finger hand pointed towards you. And again, 1-point perspective is used to get the correct proportions for each of these. So that is everything for the drawing issues slides. Just going to stop sharing that. Any questions about that? For each of those examples, there's little information, and I don't know how much help you're going to need. I don't know how many people are going to explore those things and want to bring them into drawings. So if you find yourself, really curious about something, you've kind of done a little bit of exploration just based on that bit of information from the slides, and you just would like some more, please be in touch and let me know what it is that you're interested in. Okay. Okay, not sure what atmospheric perspective is. I am going to make a note about this to make sure that I have put in the resource for atmospheric perspective. When you ask that, it leads me to wonder, did I add that? So, perspective. When we're talking about atmospheric perspective, it's got nothing to, well, it's not specifically referring to perspectives. So when you're talking about looking at something from above, you're talking about point of view, and that would be bird's eye view. Atmospheric perspective is when you are, if you think of a scene, for example, and you think of it having a foreground, middle ground, background, the objects, the colors, the lines, the contrast, all of those things are more clearly, or the most clearly defined in the foreground. So you see the highest contrast in the foreground, you see the most detail in the shapes in the foreground. In the middle ground, there's still, detail, but there isn't as much. In the background, there's the least amount of detail. So you're recognizing that, when you're looking back into distant space, you're looking through air that has particles in it, and it starts to make the details in the distance kind of fuzzy. So colors aren't vibrant anymore. You start to see, a lot of, think about looking at the mountains. You start to see kind of blue grays and kind of mauvey colors, and you don't see the greens of trees anymore, that sort of thing. So I'm going to check to make sure that that information is in Core Spaces for you, and if it's not, I'll put it in and then make a post to let you know that that's there. Any other questions? Okay, if not, oh. Okay, good question, Francis. So there are 3 of you, and I meant to email you, but I just have, like I said, just finished grading portfolios, so I have yet to do that. But there are 3 of you that were in a group by yourself, and only 2 of you were commenting, and it just wasn't working very well. What happened was it started off as a group of 6, but 3 people dropped the course, and they all dropped from your group, so you ended up with just 3 people. So what I did was I moved all of you into different groups, and let me take a look at what happened while you were in group A, and what kind of feedback you got. And I should also be able to tell if what you posted earlier traveled with you to group C. So I don't know the answers to that yet, but I will get back to you. Any other questions? Okay. All right, so I will move on to share this color theory with you. Okay, so this is in Core Spaces, and it's just done as a PDF. There's no audio with it, so you can use this as needed, and it's self-paced. So it just gives you some vocabulary. And if you are using color in your drawings, if you're critiquing drawings that have color in them, then you should be able to use these words correctly. So hue is just color name. If you don't say, you know, you don't use the word hue in your critiques or in your artist reflective statements, whatever, you're not going to be penalized for it, but you're likely to come across that word, and that's all it means, is it's just another word for the name of a color. So orange is a hue, red is a hue, etc. Color value is something that you want to pay attention to, because when you are using color in your drawings, you're going to use you know, a range of tints and shades in within each color. It's just not going to be pure red and pure green, for example. You'll use some light red and some dark red, and that's how you're going to create that illusion of depth in your drawings. So there's a comparison with the grayscale on the top, so you can see that just like you're using a range of gray values in drawings, you'd use a range of color values in drawings. So tints refer to the lighter values, so they're just the color or the hue with white added to them. And shades are your hue or your color with black added to it. There is an example here of the shades, the hue, which is the color without black added, the color without white added, and then you've got tints. Color intensity is talking about the purity of the color. So if you add gray to a color, then you decrease its intensity. And that's creating a tone of a color. So there are some examples of your hue or your color without black or without white, your tints, your tones, and your shades. When you are thinking about how you're going to use color, it's important to know that there are cool colors and warm colors. So you see the color wheel here, you've got this division, and on one side you've got cool colors, the other side you've got the warm colors. Warm colors are colors that are going to move towards you in space, so they kind of jump off the page, and cool colors recede, so they pull back. And this is one of the ways that you can create or increase depth in a drawing if you're using color and you use that, you know, we're going to talk about color schemes in just a bit, but if you're using something like a complementary color scheme, those are colors across from each other on the color wheel, so red, green. You've got the greens really pulling back in space, the reds coming forward in space, and so you create greater illusion of depth. Your warm colors, you can easily identify them just by thinking about things that naturally are warm, like the sun or like fire, and the colors that we associate with those things. So the red, the orange, the yellows. And blues are things that we naturally associate with things that are cooler in nature, or that provide us with some relief from heat. Like, you know, in the summertime, we go swimming and, you know, the water cools us off. We get the breeze from, you know, the wind, and the shade of the plants, and the moisture from the plants helps to cool us. And the colors we associate with those things, or the colors those things actually are the blues and the greens. Do think about if you're using color in your drawings, think about how color can create that emphasis, that focal point, because it really dominates. And as I said, I'm going to run through some color schemes for you so that you can see different ways of using color, so it doesn't have to be really dramatic like you see with a complementary color scheme. So the softest color scheme is a monochromatic color scheme where you're using one color. And here you see a blue-gray, and you see that range of color values, so the range of tints and shades. And here's just a couple of little examples showing the hue and a range of tints and shades for each. And here's a couple of drawings, monochromatic drawings. I guess there's just one there. So if you want a little bit more color contrast, then but you still want a really soft drawing, you could go with an analogous color scheme. And analogous colors are colors that are right beside each other on the color wheel. So when you're starting out, I recommend that you use no more than 3. Just because if you start to get into, using, 4 and 5 colors, you can get kind of contrasty looking. So here's an example of, blues and greens that you could use, and an example of what that looks like in a drawing. And here's a part of a drawing using some warm analogous colors. When you want more contrast in your drawing, you want to use a complementary color scheme. So in this example, there's something I want to point out. So first of all, complementary colors are directly across from each other on the color wheel. But in these examples, you're seeing the hues without any tints or shades. If you do this in a drawing, you create an uncomfortable kind of feeling. So keep in mind that it's always a good idea, if you're using a complementary color scheme, to allow one color to be lighter. So use more tints of that color, and for the other color, use more shades. So allow it to be darker. And that's going to let one color dominate a little bit over the other, and it'll give your drawing a more, it won't feel uncomfortable. It'll be more welcoming. So here's some examples of complementary color schemes. And I said these are colors that are directly, 2 colors directly across from each other on the color wheel. And here's an example of a drawing that uses some washes with complementary color schemes. And there's it's a bit of a mix. You see your purple, yellow here, which are complementary colors, but then you also see an analogous color scheme with the addition of some orange and, some kind of browny oranges as well. You can also do a split complementary color, which is also really high contrast. So for this, you do the same thing. You choose a color and you travel across the color wheel to find its complement, but instead of using that, you use the color on either side of the complement. So split complementary color schemes are 3 colors. And here's an example of what that looks like. There's also color triad, and these are colors that are they're equal distance from each other on the color wheel. So your color triads would be, there's a primary color triad, which is your red, blue, yellow, and there's secondary color triad, which is your orange, violet, and green, and then there's the tertiary color triads that you see the bottom 2 examples. And there's what a primary color triad looks like. This is a pencil crayon drawing. It looks more like a painting, but. Okay, so that resource is available for you to refer to, and hopefully will help you to, solve some of your initial questions that you have about how to use color in your drawings. Okay, just before I move on to the next presentation, are there any questions about anything that I showed there? Okay, it looks like not. I'm bringing up the next slide presentation. So if you are using color, I want you to think about color meaning, because of course you're answering your focus question and you're bringing meaning to your drawing. You're communicating something in your drawing. And part of what you're communicating should be some meaning, or some feeling, a mood. There should be something about it, then other than, well, I'm just going to draw, an egg for my focus drawings, and without understanding why are you drawing the egg and what kind of feeling do you want to create, what kind of atmosphere do you want to build in this drawing. Probably an egg for focus drawings is not going to be the strongest series of drawings, by the way. Anyway, you can see here with this first slide the examples of some of the things that different colors can mean. This is really varied. This is not a one-size-fits-all. So the examples here, I think, are all examples of what colors mean in Western culture. It's not necessarily the case in every culture. So what a color means to you and is going to be dependent on, the influences that you've had growing up, and what you're communicating through color is not going to necessarily mean the same thing to everyone. So that's where, in writing your artist reflective statement, you may need to do some clarifying about why you chose a certain color and what that color means to you. Some examples of how color is used in Western culture in just language is, you might hear somebody talking about feeling blue, meaning that they feel depressed or they feel down. When they talk about red, it can be, red can be, it's a fiery color, right? So it can be a good color to use if you want to express anger. It can be quite jarring. And then black is, dark. It sometimes is used to express depression, but more commonly blue is used for that, whereas black is anger, like is a stormy, cloudy kind of thunderstorms type mood. And then green is associated with envy. There's some more examples of color symbolism and how it's used in language. And do refer to these slides about, how color, is associated with different moods, and, like yellow and laughter and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to jump through these. There's a couple of slides here. I didn't give the URL for this one, but for this one, there's a URL showing these lists of what color means in different cultures. So you have Western, Eastern, European, Middle East, etc. So if you're not sure, you don't remember what a color means in the culture that you're most familiar with, you can refer back to this resource. So there's some slides here that does provide some of those, some of that information from that previous slide for you, and just noting what the colors mean in different cultures. And then most of the examples that I've shown here are design examples, not drawings, but they're just meant to show you how these different colors communicate different moods, feelings, or different meaning. And also addresses some of what I was talking about in the previous slide presentation, where you're dealing with warm colors and cool colors, and how in this example you've got a warm color, and you can see how, not just because of color, of course, also because of diagonal, but definitely the color together with the diagonals creates this feeling that these things are coming out towards you. Here's a red in a painting, and it really contributes to the meaning of this painting, which you can see is this guerrilla army, and the strength of the army is being communicated, and also the harshness, the realities of the violence of war. And another painting showing the more of an orangey red or an orange, but the strength of that. Some more meaning here with yellow. And yellow is often associated with happiness, but yellow is also a color that we see when somebody's very ill. You think about somebody who's jaundiced. So you do need to be careful about using yellow, and be really careful about the tint or shade of yellow that you choose. And also be aware that yellow is a really strong color. It demands attention more strongly than white does. And it's why we see it, it's universally used on caution signs. And this slide talks about what I just mentioned here. So here's some uses of yellow in design. And blue, when you're using blue, you have to remember that there's so many different blues out there, and they mean different things. They are all cool, so they're all going to recede in space. So they're going to, if you want to create more depth, you might want to think about using some blue in a drawing. And here's what I was talking about being aware of the different blues and how they create or they communicate very different meanings. So as dark blue, think of a business suit, and how dark blue can often leave you feeling like the person that you're with, just because they're wearing that dark blue suit, they are a voice of authority. They're perhaps somebody you can trust. They're somebody who's maybe sophisticated, who's dignified. And I know these are all stereotypes here. And do keep that in mind. And that's different than what you're going to communicate if you use a bright blue, which is probably still communicating some strength and perhaps dependability, but it's it's in a gentler way, and it's also a lot cooler and more refreshing. And then you have the very light blue, which is going to give you a feeling of peacefulness and calm. I'll just go through these quickly and leave it up to you to read through these. So here's an example of blue in a painting from Picasso's Blue Period, and blue in design. And you can see that blue can be very strong, and of course the arrangement of the different parts of this design in the diagonals definitely contributes to the strength that you see here in this drawing, or in this design. So that is it for those slides, and I'm wondering if you have any questions about that. Okay, so as I said earlier, you've been provided with just a little bit of guidance for those different techniques that you can bring to your drawings, like layering and surface preparation, etc. If you need some more help with those, please ask. If you are wanting to use color and you need a little bit of guidance with that, don't be afraid to ask about that as well. And if there are no questions, we will wrap this up. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.